I'm Yvonne Hamoud, registered social worker and owner of New Moon Counseling. But out of the office, I'm a mom, wife, daughter, sister, and friend. Join me each week as I sit with a special guest to discuss everyday things that impact our mental health. We'll be chatting about everything from mental health and relationships to media and current events, as well as personal experiences and reflections, all in the hopes of normalizing our humanness and helping you see that you're not alone. This is Outside the Therapy Room. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Outside the Therapy Room. Today, we are talking about men's mental health, which is a topic that's often wrapped up in stigma, I think. Today, I'm joined by John Shearer, a therapist who works closely with men and the owner of Kickstart Men's Therapy in Guelph. Hi, John. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to do this today.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. So I thought we would start off with an introduction of yourself. This is your very first time on the podcast, so tell us about Kickstart Therapy.
Yeah, so Kickstart Men's Therapy is a practice based out of Guelph. We have an office here, but we obviously work with men throughout the province as well. We've been open for about 3 years now, and yeah, like focused on men's mental health, um, different journeys in that scope. We work with couples as well, teenage boys, really around like the unique aspects of men's mental health journeys and trying to provide a place and a service that's kind of unique to that.
Yeah, that's amazing. And because we are outside the therapy room, we always like to hear from our guests about their lives outside of their profession. So, is there anything you're comfortable sharing with us?
Sure, yeah. I'm a dad. I have two kids, and I spend a lot of time coaching my son's various sports. So I'm a hockey coach as well. So actually, like bleeds really into the work I do with guys.
Hmm.
My family likes to hike and get outside a lot. I just really love the family kind of vibes that my life has brought to me. And my background is nothing to do with therapy. So I come from about a 10 plus year career in the corporate world
Hmm.
and kind of came up through banking and finance and sales, um, and kind of was shaped by that before doing what I do now. But now I spend a lot of time here and around Guelph and hang out with my family. Um, and yeah, I enjoy life quite a bit.
Yeah, that's quite a shift going from corporate world into this kind of space. That's cool.
Yeah, it's kind of my origin story that I
Yeah.
often share with people. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks again so much for being here. Obviously, there's so many different avenues that you just mentioned where men's mental health might come up. So, in the corporate world, in your coaching, all of these different areas where I think a lot of like a toxic masculinity can sometimes be in those environments. But before we get into all of those things, what drew you to working with men and men's mental health specifically?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm always happy to share the story. When my son was born, 2 months after that, so I was already kind of going through this identity shift as a new father and trying to figure out what I was supposed to do as a dad, and like again, not having had the tools or resources maybe to help me kind of on that journey. My wife and I did a lot of like the perinatal classes and parenting classes. Most of them are pretty much geared towards mom and kind of how to support mom.
Hmm.
So I didn't really know what I was doing going into fatherhood, besides like do my best kind of thing. And within 2 months of my son being born, I lost my job. So the company I was working for, that was a big part of my identity as a man, was like my career and what I did for a living. They let me go, and I was now unemployed as a new father. And it was the first point in my life where I just had no idea what to do. I was very lost. I was struggling. And it dawned on me that as successful as I had been, as educated as I was, I had no skills to deal with like difficulty, challenges, mental health stuff, because it wasn't a part of my like traditional masculine life. Like
Hmm.
it was always push that stuff away, don't think about it, tough it out. I grew up as an athlete, and it was all the messaging was like just keep going.
Yeah.
And then when life hit me, which it does, I didn't have the tools, and it really got me thinking about why that was. And initially, I didn't really even think of therapy first. It was more so like the socialization of boys and men, and
Hmm.
how I got to that point in my life. So like inept with the things that I looked to my wife, and she was able to do those things. And a lot of women in my life I admired for that. And then a lot of the guys were like, I don't know how to do this. So I got really fascinated with the kind of like socialization aspect of how we treat boys and young men, and then what kind of happens to grown men in that case.
Hmm.
And through that, kind of got fascinated with social work. Uh, did my first BSW and then went into the MSW program to become a men's therapist. So it was kind of a full circle moment.
Yeah.
I wanted to be a change maker in that space, and not just like think about it or complain about it, but actually do something. So
Hmm.
yeah, complete shift for me from the corporate world into what I do now.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think all of us therapists have some like an origin story that stems from our
Yeah.
own experience with our own mental health and, navigating emotions and all of these things. But that's so great to kind of see you kind of get out of that space and be able to answer some of those questions. Why did I not have the tools? And so that's great. And I think that, you're the right person to be here for this topic because, men's mental health, there's so much, I think, and I've mentioned this in previous episodes before. I was kind of surrounded by men and boys. I have two younger brothers. I had a lot of male friends when I was growing up. I have two boys now. So there's like constantly been around a lot of men, and I can see kind of the shifts as well in terms of what I want to teach my kiddos versus what I saw my dad when he was navigating his own emotions and what that kind of looked like. Same with my
Yeah.
brothers who often come to me for support. And so there is a lot. There is unfortunately still a big stigma for men experiencing emotions. There's still all of these mixed messages. But when you hear the phrase men's mental health, what comes up for you?
Yeah, like when I hear that phrase, I think of a lot of the stuff that flies under the radar, like it's under the surface, right?
Yeah.
When we think mental health generally, we're thinking the overt aspect of it. I think
Mm-hmm.
what someone who's anxious or depressed or these kind of things might embody or look like. Men's mental health is often the opposite. It's what we call covert, which is things that don't show up as, again, to your point of like emotions and these things being challenging, they don't show up in that way. They show up through behaviors or
Mm-hmm.
decision making, or changes to how we're showing up in our relationships, and often not at all through the lens of feelings and emotions and these things, which a lot of men really struggle to even like understand or notice.
Mm-hmm.
So men's mental health for me is a different journey. Not always, but often we're approaching it through these kind of um, noticing something's not right or something's wrong, but not maybe being able to put our finger on it. And a lot of the men I work with, that's where the journey starts. It's just like, it's the oh no moment where they know something's not right in their life or something's not aligning, and they want to kind of figure it out but don't know where to start. Um, in our clinic, very few people are coming through with like any sort of diagnosis or like I have this or I have that. It's just like I don't know what's going on. And that's a great starting point for men's mental health, is like, let's start to ask the question, what's going on for you?
Yeah, you're so right that even just in the men in my life, that's definitely, it's a behavior. It's something physical is happening here. I'm not feeling well. Something's off. And we don't really look at our emotional health in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
In your line of work, I guess what would be some of the most common mental health challenges that you see men struggling with?
Yeah. Again, there's a lot of things we could talk about here.
Yeah.
I would say like the main one that we see come in, or that I work with through my kind of own experience, is kind of like maybe like a midlife crisis kind of concept, which
Mm-hmm.
again is a very kind of generic term. But a lot of men who are maybe middle aged, or I'd say between like 35 and 50, and just like feeling like something's off in their life. And it's this very kind of classical, like we've done all the things, we've got all the things we're supposed to have, and I just feel like something's missing, or that something's not here, or I feel empty inside. And it's a very classical kind of presentation that we see in men's work.
Mm-hmm.
Um, And we have some certain ways we approach that kind of thing, but it would be like the most common thing I think we see.
Hmm.
Second to that would be kind of relationship stuff. It's a 1A, 1B kind of thing. And sometimes they're very
Yeah.
related. But a lot of guys we
Hmm.
work with are coming in regarding relationships. That could be a referral, like the wife referral, we call it, right?
Hmm.
Or just, guys on their own wanting to like figure out what's going on with their relationships. Can be like an intimate relationship or family dynamics. But a lot more men than ever right now are trying to figure out their role in their relationships and how they're showing up, in a more kind of honest way.
Hmm.
And that's a big one that we see a lot too.
The time frame that you kind of pinpointed, like 35 to 50, there's so much that's happening there.
Mm-hmm.
There's, maybe they've been in their career for a long time, or it's a switch in their career, or something outside of their control has happened. Their family's kind of growing or developing in a certain way, or people who are not where they thought they would be at that age. And so there's so much going on, but what kind of things do you see in your work?
Yeah, so you kind of hit the nail on the head there. There's usually like a pain point, there's a trigger event. It can be children leaving home. So kids have gotten older, they're moving
Mm-hmm.
out. It can be change to job or role, like my company sold or I lost my job, or even like I have a new role now at work that I've never had in 20 years.
Yeah.
It can be change in their relationship with their partner. So, things are just changed over the years as they do, right? So it's
Mm-hmm.
usually like an event of some sort that kind of signals this stuff. And it poses the question to men like, okay, who am I now? Right? I've been this
Yeah.
thing for all these years. If you're identified as dad for 20 years and you just were kind of in that mindset of raising kids and now your kids are gone, a lot of men have never stopped to figure out who they actually are, separate from those identities.
Mm-hmm.
So this is kind of that crisis idea, right? Is like, um, in some of like the psychoanalytic literature, it's like your soul is calling you to answer the question of who am I.
Right.
So a lot of men are kind of looking to figure that out. Is like, who am I now? It's not who I was, and the suffering happens when we try to keep pretending we are the same person.
Mm-hmm.
And the pain is you're not. So we're told inherently that you know this isn't you anymore. You got to figure it out, and that's hard because no one really knows where to start with that often. It's why
Yeah.
the joke is to like buy a car or like do something like that to just try to pretend like it's not actually there. But it doesn't work. Like again, the unique part of men's work and men's mental health is through the systems of privilege. Like a lot of guys are well off and they can buy the car and they can take the vacation or get the cottage, and by and large most find that pretty empty. And this kind of takes me into like what this other main area of this work is, which is what we call success depression. So
Mm-hmm.
we look at depression often through the lens of like um, we someone's passed away or we lost our job or something, what we'd consider bad has happened to us. But a lot of men experience depression through a different lens, which is through achievement and success, which has kind of its own unique take to it because there's almost a shame involved of how can I feel so bad when I have so much,
Yeah.
or I have all the things I was told I was supposed to strive for and get, and I feel just as empty as I did before. It
Mm-hmm.
gets into this like arrival fallacy concept, but a
Mm-hmm.
lot of men we see, and it's kind of my like big niche that I work with, are successful men who feel really empty with their success. And that's where we get into this idea of like, okay, maybe it's not who you are then, right? Like the success
Yeah.
you had isn't actually what you care about or what matters to you. And that's a really fun journey to go on as a therapist.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of clients really enjoy that work.
Yeah, we get excited as therapists too when we're like, "Ooh, okay, this is good. This is going to get
Yeah.
better." But yeah, going back to your point about like fatherhood and kind of that identity shift when their kids are grown, it's so interesting because as a mom and speaking to moms, that's something that they're experiencing as well. Kind of who am I outside of being this identity as a mom. And it's so interesting to hear that both parents are going through that, but very separately. I don't know. It might happen in some households, it might not, but I don't know if there's really that connection or that conversation, be like, hey, I'm kind of feeling like I have no identity outside of being a mom, or hey, I feel like I don't have any identity outside of being a dad, and kind of be able to support each other through that. I think it's interesting to hear that that's something that men are experiencing. And of course, when you look at it, you're like, of course they are. If both parents are experiencing these big shifts happening in their lives with a big area, their big identity, a big role that they served for such a long time, it's just, again, like, you know, we're opening up the curtain to be like, both people are experiencing this. How can they support each other? But it was just interesting to me.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, we sometimes put the gender divide in when we're talking about these
Yeah.
things, but
Yeah.
we're all humans, right? And having a child is it's a different experience for mom and dad, but we all
Mm-hmm.
uh, experience similar things. I do a lot of presentations for perinatal clinics, and I'll try to jump on at the womb and these kinds of places that do a lot of mom events to try to
Yeah.
give like my 2 cents about being a dad and what it's like for fathers,
Yeah.
because I think that's one of the reasons that I'm motivated to do this work is there's just not a lot out there for dads.
Mm-hmm.
Often the groups for dads, and we can get into this when we talk about men's mental health more generally, are just how to support mom, right?
Yes.
And for a lot of guys, that tells us the message that then that must mean we're not able to have our own problems, right? If we're
Mm-hmm.
just here to support, then that means we can't also suffer or go through hard things. And that's, I think, what a lot of men have received in that space as
Yeah.
an unintended message. But yeah, like we're going through our own identity shifts and figuring out who we are, and
Mm-hmm.
also trying to figure out, like in the context of our relationship with our partner,
Yeah.
where we fit in and what that new role looks like. So yeah, it's all
Yeah.
part of living a life for sure.
Yeah, this might be a whole other podcast topic for another time, but even the beginning journey of parenthood, I remember my partner being like, okay, so I had your whole attention, and now this little baby
Hmm.
has your whole attention. How can we make space for us? So yeah, there's so much that's happening there. But yeah, moving on, because this, like I said, this conversation could be its own
Yeah.
episode. But why do you think, men are less likely to seek help compared to women, in terms of like your experience again as a man going through your own experience at the time, trying to seek out support? Therapy wasn't the first thing you went to, you went for social. But I think for a lot of men I've seen come through our practice, it's, this is my first time, this is really scary, I don't know if I need to be here. Am I maybe I'm not as, I'm doing okay, so I don't actually need to be here. So why do
Hmm.
you think it's so much more difficult for men to seek help?
Yeah, I mean, I get asked this question all the time, obviously, because this is what I do. And I kind of have two different answers. One is the one we always talk about, which is the stigma of like men being able to be vulnerable, and
Mm-hmm.
you know, under the lens of traditional masculinity, we're not allowed to be weak, right? And it's almost better to suffer than to be seen as needing help.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how we're raised in our society. So that's obviously the big one. And also thinking that if I were to ask for help, it has to be at a point where I'm no longer able to do this myself. And that's not always the right approach to therapy, as we know. Like sometimes you want to
Yeah.
kind of get ahead of it a little bit. So a
Mm-hmm.
lot of guys we do see, it's the rock bottom kind of idea, or like being almost pressured or forced to go because it's just like their situation is getting too dire. Um, and that's kind of the general idea of it. My take has always been different, which is men actually would really love to dive into this work and feel in 2026 that they are able to talk about these things and do the work, but they've never really seen therapy as something that's inclusive to them.
Mm-hmm.
That was my experience. It wasn't that I wasn't willing to talk or do the work. It's I didn't really know where I was welcome.
Yeah.
And I look at that more as like a business thing, a marketing thing of like, okay, who's calling the dads in, who's calling the men in, and
Mm-hmm.
saying, not we also work with you, but we work with you, right? And the example I always give is the the connections I had at the time when I was looking were all through like my wife's perinatal supports, right?
Mm-hmm.
And those were all 100% branded to mom. but also if you wanted, a dad could go. And to me, that just didn't feel like they would maybe get me that well.
Yeah.
And again, this isn't based on truth. It's just the perspective I had as a very kind of traditional guy being like, yeah, I don't know about that. It doesn't seem like they'd really get what I'm going through. So I
Hmm.
think a big part of it is how we talk about therapy for men, what it looks like. We still really struggle in men's therapy with the idea of like referrals, right? And I mean referrals from clients. This is this
Hmm.
interesting thing, which is, and I'm going to generalize, but a lot of women will share who their therapist is with their friends. I'm like, you got to go see Yvonne. She's amazing. And in men's therapy, because more of that stigma, no one talks about it still.
Yeah.
And I shouldn't say nobody, but it's very infrequent that we
Hmm.
would see that kind of referral. So there's still like a hill to climb. Um, but I am very optimistic. Like more men really want to get into this work and
Yeah.
change their lives and do things differently than before. And I think now as we see one, more men get into the work, because again, for a lot of guys that's important. They'd like to work with another guy. It's not
Hmm.
inclusive of that, but that matters sometimes. Or just more therapy practices like talking about guy stuff, right? Having resources available or sharing that they have some experience with that, I think is really reshaping that landscape a little bit. And yeah, sure, there's still stigma and there's still the societal expectations and norms, but I think we can break through that, and we are, through kind of just showing up differently to that conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. And yeah, I do see a change too in the younger generation now, also kind of
Mm.
starting to seek therapy sooner. So change is coming. Like you said, we still have a hill to climb, but I'm hopeful that, more men
Yeah,
are seeking that kind of support when they need. We
yeah.
hear,
Can I
oh,
just add
yeah.
something to that? Do you mind? And I don't know if we'll get here, but I think it's important because I know a lot of therapists listen to this.
Hmm.
Um, Again, good sample size because I just kind of work with men, so I see all these guys coming in. A lot of them have gone to therapy before. So sure, there's a lot of first timers, as there always will be, but a lot have tried therapy before. And quite often, again, the feedback has been like, it didn't feel right to me. Like something felt
Hmm.
off or different. Again, that can be anyone's perspective, but
Yeah.
I think like learning a bit about how to do therapy with men is different. You grew up with brothers, and you said it's like you might have a better understanding of that. But there's certain things that guys respond to better, and again, this is generalized, but
Hmm.
um, you know, a lot of the feedback I get is it was just too affirming. It wasn't, I didn't feel pushed or confronted at all.
Hmm.
It was kind of that cliche therapist stuff,
Yeah.
um,
Like all
which again was
validation, no
all
challenging.
validation,
Yeah.
what we call soft voice. So soft voice for a lot of men is just like a complete no, like this isn't going to work for. I don't. This is exactly what I
Hmm.
thought it would be. Was that.
Yeah.
So, and that, again, that's just real world feedback I always see in intakes and in people I talk
Yeah.
to. And a lot of guys come in saying, I want someone to tell me the truth, right? So my whole philosophy as a men's therapist is what we call joining through the truth. Like I build my relationship with the client through telling them the truth. It's obviously
Hmm.
subjective, but that's a big part of doing work with men and
Hmm.
getting more men in the door so that they can share their experience of positive therapy with other
Yeah.
guys. So I think it also is a lot to do with us as therapists taking some ownership of how we're showing up for guys.
Yeah, 100%. And it's all about building that rapport. And this is why
Mm-hmm.
consultations, which a lot of therapy practices offer, is so
Mm-hmm.
important so that you can make sure that somebody feels at least a little bit like it's a good fit before really committing to a full session with somebody. But
Sure.
we hear that a lot too. And it's really hard to um, yeah, kind of find the support that you're need, especially for men. It's probably reduced a little bit in terms of the
Mm-hmm.
people that they can go to. So thank you so much for bringing that up. That is
Yeah,
very
yeah.
important. Okay, let's move into I'm fine culture. There's the
Mhm.
constantly, hey, you're off right now. Something that I hear from like the female's perspective, something I've experienced too with the men in my life is you seem off right now. Is everything okay? Are you fine? So there's an opening, and then it's met with, yep, everything's fine. I'm fine. I'm good. And it's not really the invitation of, hey, let's talk about it, isn't accepted or welcomed. And so what are your thoughts of I'm fine culture?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good one. Yeah, so our status quo answer to everything is good or fine, or,
Hmm.
it is what it is. That's a big one, right?
Yeah.
Works a lot of blue collar guys. It is what it is always. Their mom could have died yesterday. It is what it is.
Hmm.
Um, so how I approach this, and this has actually changed because, conventional wisdom was always like, I'm here if you need me, just so you know, like
Right.
I'll be here if you want to talk. I don't find that as helpful anymore. I think when I'm working, and this is like not as a therapist, but if I'm just talking to another guy, because that's
Hmm.
also part of my life is, being around guys and being caring about their well-being is not letting them get away with I'm fine. So
Yeah.
if a guy were to say I'm fine, and I know that that's probably not true, I'm gonna tell him how are you really doing, right? I need to
Hmm.
know. Not that I need to know, but like, how are you really doing? I
Yeah.
think just a little bit more showing that you actually care and you're
Hmm.
not going to run away from it opens the door pretty quickly. Because I'm fine as saying that I don't think you can handle what I'm going to say, right?
Right.
If I show you what I'm truly thinking or feeling or experiencing, you're going to run away, you're going to leave me, you're not going to want to know me anymore because that's weak and soft and all these other
Mm.
things. So if we can hang in there and just say, no, I'm here. Like, I want to know what's going on. Tell me. And again, it's with guys, it's usually okay to be pretty like blunt about it. We don't have to be super soft always.
Yeah.
That really opens the door to just feeling open to sharing. So that's always how I kind of approach that thing is tell me how you're really doing, right? And
Hmm.
you'd be surprised how quickly the veil falls off, the mask comes off, and people are open to sharing what's going on for them. Um,
Yeah.
a lot of men don't ever get asked that, right? A story I like to share often is I had a neighbor who was like a single father, and I could tell he didn't have a lot of like connections. And I told him once, just like over the fence, kind of like, "Hey man, looks like you're doing a great job raising your son," and he just bawled, like just
Mm.
fully broke down. No one's ever said anything to me in my life about if I'm doing this good,
Yeah.
right? If I'm doing this the right way, or if I'm even like competent. A lot of us have never heard that stuff.
Hmm.
We're constantly just doing and never asking, and I think that's a big part of it is just holding on to them for a second and providing that feedback, that reassurance, or asking them, letting them know it's safe to be there with them right now. So yeah, my it's fine culture response is always no. Tell me how you're actually doing.
Yeah.
And guys we want to open up, right? That it's not that we want to be shut down and closed off. It's that that's what we feel safe with.
Hmm.
Um, and we would love to be able to change that typically. So yeah, that's how we can
Yeah.
open the door.
Yeah. And a lot of that, like not really feeling safe or keeping all those emotions in, a lot of that can be taught when we're young. And I think, but in society, we can see how different little girls and little boys are treated when it comes to their emotions. And so,
Hmm.
like, what kind of messages do you men receive growing up about emotions and vulnerability? Because it is about safety, if you wanting to feel the safety to be able to be vulnerable with somebody.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, in the men's space, we call this normal boyhood trauma. So we actually look at this as trauma, which is
Yeah.
boys around the ages of 5 or 6 are starting to be told that if you're a man, you don't cry, you don't feel, you don't do
Hmm.
girl stuff, right? It's really that gender line. My son is in grade 1. I remember him in kindergarten starting to say, "Boys don't cry," and I'm like, "Where are you learning? Like, how
Hmm.
is this being delivered to you?" Right? And
Yeah.
again, I am like the healthy masculinity feminist therapist, and my son is coming home from school with all of the things. I'm like, oh my
Hmm.
god, here we go. So it's part of the society, part of the culture.
Yeah.
So around that age, and again, there's a lot of research that shows actually before that time, little boys are actually more expressive, if not equally, but like some research, like they're actually more able to articulate emotions and feelings until they're told to stop that. So this isn't
Hmm.
like a biological thing. This is actually learned, right? So
Yeah.
that's why we call this normal boyhood trauma, because it is a downward pressure on their expression. And once that's shut off, it's pretty hard to turn back on. So what happens is what we kind of look at as like a learning deficit then for the next 10 years of their life into adulthood, where they don't have experience talking about how they feel or even being able to name what those things are. So then we get into another kind of normal term, which is normative male alexithymia, which is this idea that many men have what's called alexithymia, which is the inability to notice, name emotions. So, again, this comes in all the time in therapy. My wife says I don't talk enough about how I feel or what I'm feeling like. And often when we inquire, it's like, I don't even know what that means. Like,
Yeah.
what does an emotion feel like? What are they called? I know some of them, but like not able to articulate. So this is a lifelong process that brings men into like the current phase of adulthood. And again, in relationships in this generation, which are expected to be open, expressive, communicative, and relational, a lot of men don't have that learning to help them get there, right?
Hmm.
So that's a big part of how men and boys are socialized, and it's not relational. If we look at this as like the patriarchy is not relational. It is the one-up culture, right? It's
Yeah.
superiority, and that doesn't set us up for connection.
Hmm.
And that's why a lot of men and a lot of relationships struggle right now, is because there is an expectation of men, rightly so, to be more than they're able to sometimes because of that lack of expressiveness. And it's not,
Hmm.
again, this isn't our fault. It's our responsibility to do something about it.
Yeah.
But having been told since 5 to never cry and never feel anything, it's pretty hard to show up to the table with a full deck of cards when that's how we grew up.
Hmm. Yeah, we're kind of taught to suppress these emotions, or I guess men are taught to suppress these emotions. But how
Mm-hmm.
does this emotional suppression actually show up in? You talked a little bit about how it shows up in their lives and in relationships, but how does it show up at work or in their physical health? Because as we know, our emotions can impact our physical health. So, yeah,
Yeah.
emotional suppression.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big topic, right?
Hmm.
It doesn't show up. Again, the idea of suppression isn't that it's a disappearing act. It's not emotional disappearance. It's still
Yeah.
there. It's just we're not doing anything with it, right? Actually, we are doing stuff with it, but it's leaking out the sides. So I mean, that's again where these behavioral things come in. So when we're not able to be with and notice and explain and describe how we feel, start drinking more. We might use drugs. This is where a big part of our practice in men's work is like porn addiction and things of that nature.
Hmm.
Sort of like coping behaviors because we aren't able to be with what we're experiencing. This also
Hmm.
comes into like this idea of there's these points in life where more stuff starts to happen, becoming a parent. And
Yeah.
oh, all of a sudden there's more stuff inside of me that's been activated and I don't have the language to handle this. That's what I went through, right? I didn't have the language to be like, what is this?
Hmm.
Um, so it's a big part of that at work. And this is a kind of, I do a lot of work with business people. It's again my background, and this idea of emotional intelligence is big in the business world, right? Everyone wants to
Hmm.
be emotionally intelligent, and we'll put that on their resume and talk about it in interviews.
Yeah.
Um, and we know through this like Dunning-Kruger effect that like a lot of people who think they're really emotionally intelligent are actually the least emotionally intelligent. And there's some fascinating research and studies on this. Um, but like it's a big part of being a good leader and a good boss and a good colleague is being able
Hmm.
to not just like be hyper vigilant for other people. That's often what it is for a lot of guys is hypervigilance,
Yeah.
and not actually being able to notice in themselves what they're feeling or be able to sit with that emotion in somebody else, right? It's that empathy aspect to it also.
Hmm.
There's a lot of things that this kind of suppression and skill deficit around emotions can bring out in men, in professional life, in family life. Um, just as a quick aside, there's some really fascinating research on how men who have this alexithymia, which is again like the inability to notice and name emotions, actually has real world impact on babies. So in the first 18 months of life, they've done some studies, and men who rank high in alexithymia, their children show lower coping
Mm,
skills, like, and mom as well, because
yeah.
again, dad's not able to show up to that relationship in the most effective way. So it's not just a personal problem either. It has like the
Mhm.
downstream effects throughout our families.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. Do you see a change in generation? I mean, you mentioned working with a lot of people in business, a lot of men in different ages, but with this, um, I guess, like emotional suppression from a young age that we're taught, are you starting to notice differences in the generations that you work with?
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously like the massive statistical difference of like, people who are born in the 1950s to people today.
Yeah.
But I think it really varies. It's very familial based, right? Like what were your parents like?
Yeah.
Because this is all learned. Again, like this idea of normal boyhood trauma that we call it is a learned thing. It's like what our
Hmm.
families were open to and how expressive they were and how much time they made for us as boys to talk about how we were feeling and those types of things. So I think there's a big variation in, like, again, this is also cultural. Like some cultures are just, we don't ever talk about anything, and others are more expressive.
Yeah.
So it's hard to pinpoint it in that way. I think there's more young people today wanting to do better. Um, I don't know that that's as much as they want to do better as they are in relationships where there's a higher expectation of connection.
Mm.
Um, Again, like a lot of our clients who are maybe, I'm 40, our age, and their parents, there's maybe a partner in that male female relationship who, it's a lost cause to get Joe to change and be more like connected at, 75 years old.
Yeah.
Today, the expectation going into a relationship is that you're able to do those things. And again, fully rightly so, we need to be able to be relatable
Hmm.
and relational as men, but that's kind of the driver. So a lot of the young guys I work with are doing it to be able to be good partners. And, there's this somewhat selfish, I want to be able to find a girlfriend and be someone who can do these things. That's
Yeah.
probably not an idea that men would have had in generations past.
Hmm.
It was about providing and like, what kind of job did I have? And now it's more so like, what kind of partner can I be? And that's a really cool evolution, I think.
It is, and it's such a great like cycle breaker, right? If you're like, oh, I
Yeah.
don't really want to follow this path that I see the men in my life experiencing. I want to do something new. I want to, understand myself a little bit more, have not only healthy romantic relationships, but friendships as well. We had a conversation, I think it was in the last season, or yeah, in our first season, where we talked about men friendships and we talked about how it's portrayed in media. And in some instances, there is a lot of that vulnerability and intimacy that two male characters have. So, for example, Joey and Chandler from Friends, like, they're real buddies. They have real conversations. Sometimes like Chandler wants to like back off a little bit, but there is that kind of emotional intimacy that exists there. And so that's being seen now, and people are wanting to recreate that in their own kind of social circle. So it's a really cool thing to see kind of those cycles starting to break with the new generation now. One thing that you mentioned earlier was shame. And
Mm-hmm.
shame can play such a big role in all of our lives. But I think for men who are really suppressing some emotions or are unable to maybe fully grasp or label the emotions that they're feeling, how does shame play a role when men are struggling?
Yeah, shame is a big part of that, and how men experience their emotions. And
Hmm.
again, when we're not um, blessed through, again, this like deficit of a wide range of things, sometimes shame is like one that is front and center for us. We always say anger, and that's for a lot of guys, but shame's a big one for sure. Um, you know, Traditional masculinity is shaming in nature, which is if you're not man enough, like you should be ashamed of
Hmm.
that.
Yeah.
So, there's this like gender role strain theory, which is basically traditional masculinity is trying to be all these things, which is stoic, you know, powerful, shut down. And if you get there, great. You've like checked the box of patriarchy, but you're totally devoid of like what's human. And on
Hmm.
the other side, if you don't do those things and lean in towards being a connected relational person, you then have the strain of not being man enough, right? So it's like this double-edged
Yeah.
sword that men live on of, you go one way and you have your own issues and you go the other way and it's like another set of things. So that's
Hmm.
a big part of how shame enters for a lot of men. I really think though, as a men's therapist, uh, again, therapy has addressed shame a lot. Like it's not a new idea. What we don't do a good enough job with, though, as therapists for men, is grandiosity, which is kind of this oscillation we'll see from shame into like the one-up position.
Hmm.
So a lot of men coming to therapy aren't there because of shame necessarily. They're there because shame felt so awful they moved into this one-up grandiose position in their relationship or in their
Hmm.
job or in their life, and that was as detrimental to their life as the shame was. So that's a big part of where I think working with men really needs more highlighting, is that
Hmm.
a lot of guys are moving from that one down position of shame, and again, this is very relational in marriages, into the one up position of like, I'm better than you, or I'm better
Yeah.
than this, or like, almost that kind of that power move. And that's not relational in nature, obviously.
Hmm.
A lot of my work with guys is how to find balance. So, how do I bring you back down to this like even keeled, connective relational place with your partner, with the people you care about, or with
Hmm.
yourself, even, right?
Yeah.
And have those things can be a part of us. Like we can feel shame at times or feel awesome at times and grandiose, but to find that balance. So I think that's one of the things with shame that we don't speak of enough.
Hmm.
Um, and one of the challenges is a lot of those guys don't go to therapy, right? So when we're very grandiose, we don't need therapy. That's why it's hard for a lot of we see this in couples therapy. Often I can't get my partner to come. Um, Sometimes it's shame, but often we're oscillating into this like one up position of I don't need that. Like I'm beyond that kind of help. So
Yeah.
I see it that way most often in my clinic, um, as those two kind of things move back and forth.
Hmm. You touched on how this plays an impact in relationships. And I mean, we've kind of talked about it throughout this episode so far.
Mhm.
But in terms of the everything that we talked about, in terms of labeling mental health, their emotional health, how does that impact communication in their romantic relationships?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing that I've seen um, is going back to that kind of skill deficit. And I think that it's a misunderstanding that men don't want to do this,
Hmm.
as opposed to they don't necessarily know what you're saying or what you mean. The metaphor or analogy I always use is like, for a lot of guys, this is like going to like a fancy wine tasting and not knowing anything about wine. And this is
Yeah.
like the couples therapy conundrum is often there's a therapist who's articulate and knows a lot about emotions and these types of things. Um, there's a often female partner then in that session too, who is also able to do this, and then you have a man who has never done this. It was never a part of his life to talk about how he feels, or even know like what that really means to do that.
Hmm.
And when I get a lot of these referrals for these guys, we're starting at that kind of very basic psychoeducational level of what's an emotion, how do you know you're feeling one, what do you
Yeah.
call these things, so they can get more uh, have more of the skills to be relational that way, to communicate better. And very infrequently is it that they don't want to. I don't see many clients like, I don't want to connect to my partner. It's,
Hmm.
I don't really know what that would look like because I try
Yeah.
to, but she's saying it's not right. Or like, no, that's not it. It has to be like this. So
Right.
we both have a role to play in these things, right? Um, but that's where I think we can be more inclusive for guys to help them go, yeah, I get it. Like that's how I approached it, but I also didn't know this stuff, right?
Hmm.
Um, and we kind of think we do. This is the trick, is because we're often successful, we think we have the skills we need to be successful everywhere.
Hmm.
So we leave our job where we do well, and then we go home to a partner who's saying like, you suck at this, and we're like, that can't be true, like I'm this successful guy. But
Yeah.
there's a specific set of skills that sometimes isn't showing up for us, and we can learn it, and most guys want to. And I see a lot of really proud men do this work and go back into their homes and their relationships and use it. um, I will also say that one of the biggest kind of leverage points we have to work with men is through their children. Sometimes the marriage or the relationship with their partner is kind of like, it is what it is. We've gone through this long. I don't really need to change everything about myself, and there's sometimes resistance there.
Hmm.
When we can bring our kids into it, which is like, for a lot of guys, having their kids be in the same position they are is unthinkable. And this is
Hmm.
really that like stigma idea of I'm fine. Is, are you actually that fine? Would you put your kid in the same position you're in today and feel the same way you feel? Well, no,
Yeah.
absolutely not. I would never want them to like feel the way I feel. Okay, so you're not actually fine. You're just saying that, right?
Hmm.
But when we can explain to people and men and dads that, by being able to express your emotions and, show a wide range of expression to your children and show them repair, uh, you're actually giving them this gift that like they can take with them for the rest of their life, right?
Yeah.
And that's often like the big thing for a lot of guys to be like, okay, like how do we start this then? It's through that lens of like, I don't want someone else to end up where I am, even if I'm unwilling to like do it for myself. That's
Hmm.
kind of like this. I wouldn't call it selfless, but it's kind of what I would describe as leverage to get people to like want to have a different way to see the world.
Yeah, I like that perspective shift because it's like feeding into the empathy of their child. And then sometimes we can't feel that ourselves. Something that you touched on kind of came up as worth. And so, like self esteem, confidence, self worth, you're going into a space where you don't know as much as the women in the room know, right? If we're talking about couples therapy, and that's going
Yeah.
to impact your self esteem. That's going to make you hide. That's going to, like, just for anybody, right? We can say the same thing about, if I was to go into the corporate world, I wouldn't have no idea what the heck is happening.
Hmm.
And so there is like a lot of this insecurity that can sometimes come up, and that can be associated with shame often. But sometimes it's just so uncomfortable to be in that sense of insecurity, or even as you pointed out, which I think is very relatable for a lot of people, is your partner comes home from a hard day at work and you're like, well, you didn't say hello to me this way, you didn't pay attention to our kiddo, like you're not helping it with dinner. And there's a lot of this criticism that's coming up to that male partner, which
Yeah.
then again can just bring up those insecurities. And sometimes that just leads to a shutdown. And that is from
Hmm.
like boyhood trauma, family trauma experiences in their past.
Hmm.
But all of that kind of mixed in, it's going to
Yeah.
impact their emotions. And if that's really uncomfortable, then they're going to shut down. It's going to impact their behavior. It's going to impact how they communicate, how they show up. All of these things kind of start snowballing. And so
Yeah.
I think like self-worth and security, all of those things kind of play a role in it as well.
Yeah. I think like what I really take away from what you say there is that idea of like, you're not doing enough, you're not helping out, which is
Yeah,
again very fair criticism for a lot of men, right? And again, we do
sure.
a lot of this work, is how can we show up better? I know it's like this is the number one thing in a lot of women's therapy and doing relational stuff, is like, my husband's just not doing enough. I totally get that, and I
Mhm.
agree. um, a lot of men, because traditional masculinity and patriarchy is a performance based culture, when we hear you're not doing enough, we don't look at it as like, I need to step up. We look at it like, I'm not enough. And it's a
Yeah.
very, that's what the shame part of it, right? Is like, it just goes right to the core of what it is to be a man, which is performance based. And if we
Hmm.
don't perform, we're not good enough, right? That we are somehow not enough, not just like, oh yeah, I should help out more. The message sometimes gets miscommunicated
Yeah.
because of that kind of shame based culture. And that's one that we often see. Like, a lot of guys really take that feedback, which is totally fair and reasonable feedback, to a central kind of core, I'm therefore not enough.
Hmm.
And again, I put that squarely on this idea of like we live in a performance-based culture for men, which is like, what can you do for me? What have you done for me lately? As
Hmm.
opposed to you are enough. Maybe your behaviors aren't what we need right now, but you are okay. That's a
Yeah.
subtle shift that I think a lot of guys have to kind of get used to.
What are some common, I mean, we've already talked a little bit about this, but what are some common fears or misconceptions that men have about therapy?
Yeah, that is pointless. That
Yeah.
why would I do that, right? I think that's a big one. Um, I think there's a misconception that it's just for women.
Hmm.
It's what women do. My wife does it. I mean, I'm fine. I'll just go lift weights or again, then this is in the media a lot, right? Is like,
Yeah.
don't go to therapy, do this instead. Or don't go to therapy, take this supplement instead. Like that's very much in
Hmm.
the manosphere culture right now of all the things instead of going to therapy. And I
Yeah.
don't look at them as mutually exclusive. Like also go to the gym after you see me and like lift weights, but
Yeah.
process your stuff with me here.
Hmm.
So that's a big one. It's just kind of the culture of like, here's all the things you can do to avoid it. Um, and I think just a misunderstanding of what it is, which is like, for me, it's very relational. I give men an opportunity in a safe place to practice certain skills that they're not going to feel comfortable practicing in their day to day life. So, for
Hmm.
instance, if they want to work on this whole thing we talked about being more communicative to their partner, they have a chance to practice that with me in this safe environment, right? To give
Yeah.
their brain and their body a chance to create that kind of safety. Um, because a lot of men are this kind of like outward logical thinking stereotype, it's like, okay, what like science is going to take place here? And like, what tricks is going to change as opposed to like just the relationship itself, which is the benefit. So
Hmm.
good men's work, good men's therapy is very relationally based. It's showing a guy who's never been able to feel safe, especially with another man. If I'm using myself as the example, because traditional
Yeah.
masculinity says we're all in competition with each other. Never
Yeah.
tell a guy anything personal because they're going to use it against you. Take your job, take your wife. Like, don't do that. That's part of patriarchy, right? That's
Hmm.
why that's why women are the people that we'll go to for support so often, is because it's not a threat to us. So there's actually like a healing aspect of just doing men's work the way that I do it that way, because it allows you to develop that sense of safety. I think that's a part of it.
Hmm.
Um, there's a lot of other reasons why kind of there's that idea that it's not for you or whatever, but
Hmm.
I think that's shifting. Like I don't hear as many men anymore have those kind of stereotypes.
Yeah.
Um, and again, often the ones that do are the ones that probably need to come see us the most sometimes. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I think another misconception that you've touched on already is like the I need to be at rock bottom. Like,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Like things need to be super terrible. I need to have experienced a trauma, or I need to be doing really poorly to be able to benefit from therapy, which, as we've discussed, is not always the case. Sometimes we want to kind of get ahead of it, like you pointed out. Um, if you could suggest to a man today one small step that they could take if therapy feels really intimidating, what would you say?
Yeah, my answer to this is always just book a consultation with somebody. As you mentioned before, like they're free, they're brief. I personally have tailored my clinic's consultations to be pretty short, just to like, hey, let's give you a couple minutes just to say a few words, get the
Yeah.
wheels moving, um, and just see what that feels like. And if you didn't feel like that was great, you can always do it with somebody else, right? Like
Hmm.
again, it's not always you're not the problem, right? Sometimes it's just not a fit.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that therapy doesn't work or that you shouldn't do this. Um, Find a therapist who has experience or maybe specializes in working with men. That can be
Hmm.
kind of a comfortable thing. I would give the same advice to someone who is a postpartum woman. Like maybe
Hmm.
find someone who specializes in that work and caters to that crowd. Um, and you know, you'll be surprised the relief that comes from taking that first step.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like on the other side of it, one of the things we sometimes joke about is for some guys, like pressing the book button on the consult is like 10 years of relief. They may not even
Hmm.
show up to the consultation, but like they got far enough to like think about clicking the button, and that was,
Yeah.
something for them. And maybe we'll see them in the future. But I think, yeah, just like do a consult with a therapist if you think it's something you're interested in, and just see where that takes you. Um,
Hmm.
and don't get discouraged if it doesn't feel right or a good fit, because
Yeah.
there's a lot of us. We're all different, as therapists, and you can definitely find the one that's a good fit for you.
Hmm. Yeah, we're lucky that there is a lot of us. There's a lot of therapists, so we
Yeah,
are able to kind of, find somebody that's a good fit. But no, definitely just I appreciate you saying like just even pressing the book button is like a step in the right direction, even if you
sure.
don't even show up, because that's it sometimes takes a little bit of courage at a time to build up to actually attending a first session. So yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
no, that's great advice.
as a clinic owner, when I see like, in Jane, it's like so and so and no session booked, but they made a profile. I mean, that
Yeah.
look. I'm just like, oh, good for you. Like, I'm proud of that random person. I have no idea who
Hmm.
they are, for even
Yeah.
clicking the button and like getting their name in there.
Yeah.
Whether or not I'll ever hear from them or anything, I'm just like proud of that guy, because I know
Hmm.
what's behind that story. Like, I get how hard that is to get to that point. So yeah,
Yeah.
I'm just supportive of men starting to like consider this as an option.
Yeah, and recognize that there's people cheering you on even if you don't see them. Like we're
Yeah,
cheering on people
exactly.
that we
Yeah.
see make a profile but then don't actually come in. How can partners, family, or friends support men without pushing them too hard? Because as we've talked about throughout this, sometimes there can be a really strong push. Sometimes it's necessary.
Mhm.
Sometimes if somebody's really struggling, we do need to really, really push or challenge them or encourage them to go. But what would be something you would share to the support people of men?
Yeah, so it depends on the context, as you mentioned. Like, there's different levels of push needed sometimes.
Yeah.
On the lower level of it, it's like it's just that conversation of, hey, like, I'm worried about you. I've seen some things that maybe are concerning to me. Um, what do you think about these things, right? And again, a lot of our clients are, I'll call, handheld into the door. So their partner
Mm.
has booked the appointment, done the intake form, shown them where to go. This is the mental load of women, of course, right? Is like having to do all this stuff for their partners often. We totally understand that and appreciate that. And that's sometimes what it takes to start that change. Um, at a higher level, like, you know, a marriage is on the rocks, or there's like some really significant things going on, I truly believe leverage matters. And I've used this word before.
Hmm.
My therapy mentor is a guy named Terry Real, who is a famous couples therapist. And this is kind of his thing, is like, if you don't have any leverage, you're not going to get someone through the door, which is, why they have to do this, right? So in a
Hmm.
situation that's more serious, again, relationship is, in dire straits, or you've had enough with someone in a relationship, or they're using substances or something, that's like, you got to do something. Um, and this may not be a popular like therapy answer, but I think having leverage matters, which is,
Yeah.
hey, buddy, if you don't get help, I'm going to think about XYZ, right? I need you to go talk to someone. It's almost the or else concept.
Hmm.
Um, it's just kind of practical, because people at that point have avoided it their whole life, probably. Rock bottom doesn't always change it for people either, right?
Yeah.
Avoidance is very, very strong. So yeah,
Yeah.
it depends on what we're talking about and what the situations are. Um, but yeah, as a couples therapist, like, again, that's a lot of my own training, is that idea of like, what's going to get Bob to change finally, right? You guys are
Hmm.
70, it's been the same pattern for 50 years. What is the thing that's going to get him to change, if he hasn't already? So that sometimes matters. But the more kind of base level answer, as I mentioned, is just like, I'm worried about you. I love you. I care about you. We care about you. Here's someone you can go talk to. It's already like 9 out of 10 steps done. You just
Hmm.
have to show up.
Yeah.
That's for a lot of guys what helps them get through the door.
And if you could share anything for just like to give general support for family members of a man who's maybe struggling silently or outwardly, like what would be a piece of advice for them?
Yeah. So general advice is men tend to do the best when they're engaged in things that matter to them. So this
Hmm.
is very like behavioral, but again, the emotional landscape, the feelings, the thoughts can be who knows what internally. And again, these are private experiences, so we don't even know. We're just guessing.
Yeah.
But if we can get guys that we're worried about or we're trying to like keep their head above water to do things that we know matter to them, that can be hobbies, activities. It doesn't matter what it is, it's subjective.
Hmm.
Um, Meaning and value and purpose are really important to men. Again, a big part of men's therapy is this idea of like, what are your values? What do you care about? What do you want to do? And that is the momentum that can right the ship. So I always give that feedback because, I mean, what can we do about someone's internal state in those moments, right? But we can help facilitate them to start engaging in things that can help them
Hmm.
through kind of that like behavioral activation lens, right? So yeah, always
Yeah.
getting a guy out to go do what he enjoys, even if they don't want to. Like, no, we're going to go do this. We're going to go do this thing that I know matters.
Hmm.
Um, and that can be a thing that kind of just helps them get through.
Yeah. And then a final message to end off with to men. What's something that you would say to them if there's a man right now that's listening to this episode who's maybe starting to look at getting support, what's a message you would give to them?
Yeah, I mean, I just tell guys all the time, like, we're here for you. Like
Yeah.
there are people in this career in this work who do this just for you. You know,
Hmm.
I I'm an example of that. Our practices, I know, you guys do this too. We are here for you. We get you, and um, again, it's that first step. Like,
Hmm.
you'll be surprised how good it can feel to finally get stuff off your chest. We will often go out and brag about how much weight we lifted at the gym, but don't realize how much weight we're carrying around with us all the time. And
Yeah.
sometimes like unburdening that can make a massive difference in your life.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much. Like, again, today was just such a general conversation. A
Yeah.
lot of the different areas we talked about could be its own episode. So I
Mhm.
appreciate you being here and sharing all this information. Where can people find you?
Yeah. So we're online at kickstartmenstherapy.ca. My Instagram is at Kickstart Men's Therapy. I post a lot of stuff about men's mental health, parenting, fatherhood, what it's like to be a guy. So it's a great resource if anyone's looking for more information on all the stuff we've talked about today.
We'll include all of that in the show notes. And is there any groups or workshops, anything that you're working on right now?
Not right now. My hope in the next month or so is to launch a new men's group. It's something that's always in demand. It's just like
Hmm.
a good group for guys to be able to do work in. So stay tuned for that. But if anyone who's listening is interested in that kind of stuff, they can always just reach out to me directly, and I can get them on a wait list.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, we hope to get that up and running in the next couple of months.
That's great. Well, keep an eye out. Follow John so you have all these updates and you know when the men's group is going to happen. And thanks so much again, John, for joining us. If this episode resonated to you or it reminded you of a man in your life, please make sure to share and also follow us on social media at Outside the Therapy Room Pod. And we will see you next time. Bye. Thank you for listening to Outside the Therapy Room. This podcast is intended for educational and entertainment purposes only. If you reside in Ontario and are interested in working with one of our therapists, please visit our website in the show notes. If you reside outside of Ontario, a quick Google search or search through Psychology Today will help you find a therapist near you.